I'm 84 years old, and there is one lesson that, once it finally sank in, changed how I think about almost everything: success, failure, regret, even time itself. For most of my life, I thought I understood what mattered. I chased the same things everyone around me chased: achievement, stability, being respected, being right. I believed that if I worked hard, made good decisions, and avoided big mistakes, life would add up to something solid and satisfying. It didn't quite work that way. The lesson I'm going to share with you didn't arrive in a single moment. It crept in slowly, through small disappointments, quiet evenings, and the strange feeling that, even when things were going well, something essential was missing. But the day it finally clicked, it was like someone had reached into my mind and rotated the world a few degrees. Everything looked the same from the outside, yet nothing meant what it used to mean. Let me start with a day that, at the time, felt completely ordinary. I was in my early 70s, sitting alone at my kitchen table, drinking coffee that had gone cold while I stared at a stack of mail: bills, medical forms, a catalog, and a thick envelope from my old company inviting me to some retirement celebration for legacy contributors. 20 years earlier, that phrase would have thrilled me. A younger version of me worked nights and weekends for that word, legacy. I used to imagine people talking about me in boardrooms long after I left, repeating my ideas, praising my work ethic. That morning at the kitchen table, I felt nothing. I stared at the invitation and realized I had no desire to go. Not because I was bitter, not because anyone had wronged me, but because it simply didn't feel connected to my life anymore. The people, the titles, the projects that once felt huge had all blurred into something distant and strangely flat. I didn't understand it yet, but the seed of the lesson was there. The things I thought were permanent and defining were much more fragile, much more temporary than I had ever allowed myself to admit. A few weeks later, my granddaughter came to visit. She was in her 20s, bright, kind, anxious in a way I don't remember being at her age. We sat on the couch and she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Grandpa," she said, "when you look back, what actually mattered? Like, what was worth all the stress?" I opened my mouth to answer, ready to talk about perseverance, discipline, responsibility, all the usual words. But nothing came out. Not because those things don't matter at all, but because they suddenly felt incomplete. They were pieces of the puzzle, not the center. I thought about the nights I stayed in the office instead of going home, the arguments I dragged out just to be right, the hours I spent worrying about people's opinions who, by now, I can barely even remember. And then I thought about other moments: my wife laughing so hard she cried because of some silly joke at dinner, holding my son's hand when he was afraid before a surgery, helping my neighbor fix his fence on a hot afternoon, sitting on the porch with my father in silence, just watching the light fade. None of those moments would impress anyone reading my resume. They won't be mentioned in any speech or written on any plaque. But when my granddaughter asked what mattered, those were the memories that came rushing in, like they'd been waiting behind a door I hadn't opened in a long time. That was the beginning of the lesson. Over the next few years, life did what life always does in your 70s and 80s. It took people away. Friends I'd known for decades got sick. Some passed quickly, some slowly. Funeral after funeral, I noticed a pattern. People spoke about careers, yes, but briefly, almost out of obligation. What they really talked about were the small things: how he always showed up when someone needed help moving, how she remembered every birthday, how he made everyone feel welcome, how she sat and listened without rushing people. Almost no one praised someone for being the smartest in the room. They praised the ones who made the room feel warmer, less lonely, more human. One night after another service, I came home, sat on the edge of my bed, and it finally hit me with full force: the lesson. It sounds simple, almost cliché when you put it into words, but living it is anything but simple. Here it is. The quality of your life is determined far less by what you achieve and far more by how you show up in the ordinary moments with the people right in front of you. That's it. That's the lesson that changed how I think about everything. When you're young, you're taught that life is about big choices, big goals, big breaks. You're told to aim high, chase dreams, build something impressive. And there's nothing wrong with that. Ambition isn't the enemy. But what nobody told me clearly enough is that the texture of your days, the way you speak to the cashier, the attention you give a child telling a boring story, the patience you offer your partner when they're tired and difficult, that texture is what your life will actually feel like from the inside. You can stack up achievements as high as you like, but if the small daily moments are filled with irritation, distraction, and emotional absence, the lived experience of your life will be cold and thin. Once I understood this, memories rearranged themselves in my mind. I used to see certain years as successful because of promotions, money, recognition. Looking again with this new lens, those same years looked hollow. I saw how often I'd been physically present but emotionally missing, how often I treated the people I loved as interruptions to my important work, rather than as the very point of being alive. I remembered my son standing in the doorway of my study, holding a toy, asking if I could play just for a minute. I remembered saying without even looking up, "Not now. I'm busy." I don't remember what I was working on that day. I do remember the sound of his footsteps walking away. At the time, it felt like nothing, one small moment in a sea of moments. But when you're 84, you learn something cruel and beautiful. There are no ordinary moments with the people you love. They all count. They all add up. When you're living them, they feel disposable. When you're looking back, they're the only thing that feels solid. This lesson changed how I think about regret, too. When I was younger, I thought I'd regret the big failures, the deals that fell through, the risks I didn't take, the ideas I never followed. And I do, a little. But the regrets that visit me at 3 a.m. are rarely about lost money or missed opportunities. They're about times I was unkind when I could have been gentle, times I chose pride over connection, times I let my impatience speak louder than my love. Understanding this shifted how I react to people now. When someone is rude or short-tempered, I'm much less interested in proving them wrong or defending myself. I find myself thinking, 10 years from now, will this moment matter more as a victory or as an opportunity to be kind? Almost always, kindness wins. That's not weakness. It's clarity. This lesson also changed how I think about time. When you're young, you imagine time as a road stretching far ahead. You feel like you can afford to waste whole years being angry, bitter, competitive, or numb. By 84, you realize time is not a road. It's a collection of circles. The breakfasts, the commutes, the jokes, the arguments, the quiet evenings. If you fill those circles with tension and distraction, no amount of future achievement can make up for it. If you fill them with presence, even a simple life feels rich. So what do you do with this practically if you're not 84 yet? First, you start treating the next person you see as if they matter as much as any big plan you have. Because they do. When your partner walks into the room, you look up. When your child or friend wants to talk, you put the phone down. When a stranger seems fragile or overwhelmed, you offer patience instead of judgment. Second, you downgrade the importance of winning arguments and upgrade the importance of staying connected. Being right is satisfying for a moment. Being close to the people you care about is satisfying for a lifetime. Third, you stop waiting for a future season when you'll finally have time to be the kind, present, generous version of yourself you imagine. You will never have more time than you do in the small choices you're making today. The lesson that changed everything for me is not that goals don't matter, or that careers are meaningless, or that you should ignore your responsibilities. It's that all of those things are secondary. They are the frame, not the picture. The picture, the real content of your life, is how you treat people and how you inhabit the moments that no one else is rating or recording. At 84, I don't think much about my old titles. I rarely revisit the high points I once bragged about, but I think often about the time someone cried at my kitchen table and felt safe doing it. I think about my granddaughter's head on my shoulder while we watched a movie we'd both already seen. I think about the neighbor who told me, years later, that one brief conversation stopped him from doing something irreversible. Those moments weren't impressive. They were just real. And real is what lasts. So if you remember nothing else from an old man talking, remember this. Don't wait until the end of your life to realize that the way you show up in the smallest moments is the clearest measure of who you are. Choose to be present instead of distracted, gentle instead of harsh, curious instead of dismissive. One day you'll look back, and those choices will be the story of your life. If this resonates with you, share it with someone you love, not to impress them, but as a quiet promise that you're going to start showing up differently. From today onward, I spent decades believing that life was something I needed to get right, like a test I could pass if I just worked hard enough, thought carefully enough, made the right choices. But sitting here at 84, I realized life was never a test. It was always just moments, layered on top of each other, and the ones that ended up meaning something were almost never the ones I thought would. After the conversation with my granddaughter, after watching friends pass, after that quiet realization at the kitchen table, I started paying attention differently, not planning differently, not strategizing, just noticing. I noticed that when I smiled at the woman at the grocery store checkout, she smiled back in a way that softened her whole face. I noticed that when I asked my neighbor how he was really doing, instead of just saying hey in passing, he stood there and talked for 20 minutes about his daughter's illness and how scared he was. I noticed that the moments I felt most alive weren't when I was being applauded or acknowledged, but when I was fully present with someone who needed me to be. One afternoon I called my son, the one I used to brush off when he wanted me to play. He's in his 50s now, with kids of his own. I called him and I said something I'd never really said before. I said, "I'm sorry I wasn't more present when you were little. I thought being a good father meant providing and protecting, and I missed the part where it also meant just being there, paying attention, not always being somewhere else in my head." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Thanks for saying that, Dad." We didn't fix decades in one phone call, but something loosened. The wall I'd built with my absence started to crack, and it cracked because I finally stopped defending myself and just admitted the truth. That's part of the lesson, too. Being present doesn't just mean physically showing up. It means emotionally showing up. It means admitting when you were wrong, when you were afraid, when you didn't know what you were doing. It means letting people see you, not just the version of you that looks competent and strong. I started doing this more. With my wife, with my grandkids, with the handful of old friends still around. I stopped pretending I had everything figured out. I stopped offering advice unless someone actually asked. I started saying things like, "I don't know and I'm scared too, and that sounds really hard." And something strange happened. People got closer. Not because I was suddenly wiser or more impressive, but because I was finally real. Vulnerability, I learned, is not weakness. It's the door through which real connection walks. For so long I'd kept that door locked, thinking strength meant never letting anyone see doubt or pain. All it did was make me isolated. At 84, I don't have the energy or the time left to pretend anymore, and honestly, it's one of the most freeing parts of being this old. Here's what I wish I could go back and tell my younger self. The 30-year-old in the suit rushing between meetings, convinced that this project, this deadline, this promotion was the thing that would finally make him feel solid and significant. I'd tell him, none of that will make you feel the way you think it will. The satisfaction fades fast. What won't fade is the memory of the people you loved well, the moments you were kind when you didn't have to be, the times you stopped and listened when you could have kept walking. I'd tell him, you're not running out of time to become impressive. You're running out of time to be human with the people in front of you. I'd tell him, the argument you're about to have, the one where you're determined to prove you're right, it's not worth it. 20 years from now, you won't even remember what you were arguing about, but you will remember the look on her face, and you'll wish you'd chosen connection over being correct. And I'd tell him this, the most important part. You will not get a second chance to live these years. You don't get to go back and redo the morning you snapped at your son, the evening you ignored your wife because you were stressed, the decade you spent too distracted to notice what was happening right beside you. You get one pass through this life, and every single moment you're living right now is part of that one pass. I know that sounds heavy, maybe even a little depressing, but for me it's the opposite. Once I truly accepted that lesson, once I stopped thinking I had endless time to get around to being the person I wanted to be, I started actually being that person. Not perfectly, not every moment, but more often. I started treating ordinary Tuesday afternoons like they mattered, because they do. I started looking at my wife across the table and really seeing her, not just the role she played in my life, but the whole person, still here, still beside me after all these years. I started being gentler with strangers because I realized everyone is carrying something, and a small moment of kindness from me might be the only soft thing they encounter all day. I stopped saving my patience and attention for important people and started giving it to whoever was in front of me, because the truth is, they're all important. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Don't wait until you're 84 to figure out that the way you show up in small moments is the architecture of your entire life. Start now, today, this morning. Put your phone down when someone is talking to you. Choose patience over frustration. Choose gentleness over being right. Choose presence over productivity, at least sometimes, at least when it matters. When you're lying in bed at the end of your life, you won't be replaying your work emails or your promotions. You'll be replaying the moments you were truly alive with other people. Make sure there are enough of those moments to fill your memory with something warm. I'm 84. I've been lucky in some ways, unlucky in others, but mostly I've just been human, stumbling through, trying to figure it out like everyone else. The one thing I figured out that I'm certain of is this: love people while they're here. Pay attention while you still can. Let the small moments be enough, because in the end, they're not small at all. They're everything. If this meant something to you, share it. Leave a comment telling me one small thing you're going to do differently today. Subscribe if you want more reflections from someone who's seen enough years to know what actually lasts. Don't wait as long as I did. Start showing up now.